The Macabre World podcast is brought to you by Darker Art Studio, home of real human bone jewelry. Stock and custom pieces are available, so visit us on the web at www.darkerartstudio.com and show them your darker art side. Macabre World, a podcast from Darker Art Studio, where we explore the dark, strange, and unusual from this world and beyond. Hello and welcome to the Macabre World podcast. I'm your host, Rocky DeGotti, and today I have the special pleasure of being joined by Mr. Carl Johnson. Carl and I have known each other. Are we going to count, Carl?
We can start counting on our fingers, yeah. But we'll
and
run
then
out.
we'll need our toes.
We'll run out fast.
And then
We need an abacus.
Carl and I met. We're both Rhode Islanders, and Carl and I met many moons ago when we were both members of the Atlantic Paranormal Society, known as TAPS. Carl was on the television show Ghost Hunters for the first couple of seasons, and has also been associated with the investigation that was ongoing at the Perrin house for the Conjuring. So Carl's been around the block starting quite a while ago. So Carl, how are you? What's going on these days?
Many things. I have been delving more and more into more strictly parapsychology than, overall umbrella paranormal. Advancing theories and reading about other people's theories, which advances my learning. And I was recently on a television episode of A Haunting. I have been on several. Most recent one debuted in January, and it is titled Inner Demons, if that gives you a clue what it's about. And I am a member of Panorama Paranormal, co-founded with Elise Gianmarco Carlson, and that's a parapsychology-driven group. Actually, I say group. It's a team of two, both of us, and that is depicted in that television episode. In fact, so getting reacquainted with some former friends or older friends, venerable friends, and doing some investigating, and which is a lot of interviewing. It's not always that exciting.
Well, I think that's one of the things most people don't realize when they watch any of the shows, because now there are lots of them. And that, how heavily they're edited, and that you might have about 45 seconds of interesting tacked onto about 6 hours of nothing.
Well, I understand why they have to do that. Yes. And they have the commercial feed that they have to consider that. But to take a 2-day investigation and construct it into something cohesive and interesting is challenging.
Well, yeah,
so
there's a lot of weight. Hurry up.
Cobble them together. They cobble them together, the shows, and some of them have a touch of genuine paranormal phenomena to display. But it's not all through.
I'd love to start with the beginning. When did this start for you? Now, I also had the pleasure at the time we were associated in TAPS of knowing your twin brother, Keith. And
I know him too. Yeah.
Yeah. You've met once, twice. Isn't it true that if you guys, if it was based on DNA evidence for a crime, if you committed it, they can't tell which one of you did it because you're identical twins?
Well, I could think of a certain crime. Yes.
They really couldn't tell. They really, and you know what? Maury Povich would end up confused, wouldn't he?
That would be humorous. I don't know if they've ever had it like a twins thing. They probably have.
They should, because I know that basically identical twins, to my understanding, is the same thing as being a clone.
Yeah. No, I mean, if we were involved with the same woman, let's say, in a parental suit, you couldn't establish the
paternity. Outside of
paternity would, you really couldn't. It would just be word of mouth. Say, prove it then.
Well, if you went with word of mouth, then you wouldn't have the paternity problem, now would you?
Yeah, and I've always been the evil twin. So if I became upgraded it once and was a serial killer, you can. Guy could. They take him into for.
It ought to get dicey there, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I could
When did
be
your interest in the
remarkable.
paranormal start?
It started when by the time I was 10, I was very much into, well, we didn't call it paranormal then. We called it monster films and, scary endeavors like, well, Halloween was my favorite holiday
Oh, it
because it
sure
led into
is.
the string of the next holidays and including my birthday, Keith's and my birthday. So Halloween kicked that off. And that was just such a magical, enchanted night. I think it started by the time I was 10. I was very much interested in this mysterious, darker side, dark in the sense of inscrutable. Um, I was very much interested in paranormal manifestation by the time I reached 11 years of age. Some of my early reading was The Haunted Mind by Nandor Fodor and Psychopathia Sexualis by Kraft Ebing. Yeah, I used the dictionary a lot back then. When I was
And Grey's
uh,
Anatomy.
when Keith and I were 11, we read 10 and 11. We read Bram Stoker's Dracula and Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which are they are novels. They're not just monster stories.
Oh, certainly. No,
They're
and
about
they're
monsters.
classics. Beautifully written.
Yeah, they are classic monsters. And the classic horror films very much interested me. And I was doing experiments like with a deck of cards I had that actually came from a cereal box. I laid them out almost like a tarot reading. And I was 11 years of age, and I would turn them over, flip them, and shuffle them. And some sense told me that I could get them to change, to transmute. I just had a hunch. So I kept playing with them. And sure enough, and I told myself at the time, I must always remember this really happened. When I'm an adult, I don't want to discount it and say it didn't happen. I got the faces of two cards to change.
Very cool.
They actually changed from what they were. It's like a shell game, but with cards. And it's not that I would, mess them up so much I couldn't tell what was what. They changed. And of course, I was more hooked then. Always interested in ghosts. And I was raised in a haunted household.
Now,
I
what
did a
was
lot
that
of
like? What
I did a
was your
lot of the haunting,
experience?
really. But well, my sister and I started to play on a Ouija board when she was 11 and I was 14. Yeah, it was, well, it was, most days were business as usual, but there were times where we'd hear rapping on the wall, and disembodied footsteps. Objects in the house would be moved mysteriously. We'd find them in different places. So it was spooky, but fascinating. And then we added a voice to our ghost because my sister and I played on the Ouija board and it would spell out messages. At times it was a literal voice. In fact, we would hear that voice. And back then I had no cause to doubt the Ouija board, except my sister would say, "You're moving it, you're pushing it." No, I'm not. No, I'm not. So then it started giving us cogent answers. That was spooky. And I remember we were of that age, 14 and 11 respectively. And I asked the spirit of the board, of course, "Give us a sign, show us you're here." And the planchette moved around the board and spelled out the letters CELLAR, spelled cellar. And we had a basement cellar. So I excused myself from the Ouija play, and my sister and I went to the top of the stairs, and we waited there for about 20 minutes. And I don't think anything's going to happen. We were just getting up, and we heard there was a wooden partition along the facing down the right side of the stairwell, and there were 3 knocks on that partition. So we're on to something. We distinctly heard that. And so we waited a little while longer. We heard the 3 knocks again. I think the next time it was actually 1 knock, but it was distinctive. And so we got a series of raps, and we're all the more encouraged to talk on the Ouija board. Now, the Ouija board was giving us advice and answers and revealing things, but you couldn't really take it seriously.
Right.
Except that we were getting genuine spirit phenomena of that. We knew sometimes we'd have a candle burning, it would be snuff, just go out on its own. Or the flame would get real tall. I figured I was probably just drinking up the wax, but inexplicably, the candle flame, when we asked certain questions, would elongate, brighten. So that's how I really got started in it. I was not then a paranormal investigator, except maybe privately in my parents' house.
Well, I
But
mean, that's a form of investigation. You were trying for
yes.
communication, gathering data,
So
looking
it's,
for experiences and ways to communicate.
yeah. And
Got
the
more
house was
formal
haunted.
later on, though, huh?
Yeah, well, yeah, the house was genuinely haunted. Those things would happen. Like I said, objects would appear and disappear and transport somehow and reappear in other areas of the house. Um, I started to see the apparition of a woman or a female form down in that cellar. See, by the time I was 16, I wanted my own room and my privacy from the room my brother and I shared. I thought he snored. And I just wanted my own pad. So I said, oh, I'll bring girls down here sometime. No, and I had my television down there. And after I'd been down there a couple of weeks in my bedroom down there, uh, started to hear that moving around. We would often hear shuffling and moving. My father would say, what are they doing down there? We weren't even down in the cellar. The dehumidifier would be found at the other side of the cellar. We had stacked furniture that would be moved about. But now I was down there and hearing these movements. The objects were banging and moving, like poltergeist activity, we would call it. And that was fascinating, but disconcerting. More than a couple of times I had to move up to the couch and sleep there. It was frightening.
I can't be the only person, because I'm sure anyone listening right now is going to say everything you've described up to this point. Were you guys that calm? There was no like shrieking or fright involved. It was all just, very, oh, well, now we've got an answer. Oh, wow, there's some.
It was kind of like that. I was objectifying it, and studying it, but I really had no place else to go and sleep.
I've been scared out of my mind.
Several times, but one night I was really scared. I think I'd already seen the woman down there, and I would call upstairs. I'd go, Mom, Dad. And they said, what? I said, oh, nothing. I couldn't find the light. I was in the dark, but I had seen her. I saw her 4 times.
Wow.
And she was very clear, like a person.
Now, one of the things I always loved to do for TAPS was the historical research part. Did you ever look into any of the history of the house, or to have any kind of maybe connection on some of the historical data that might clarify who you were seeing? Or
okay, I'm going to try something. I'm going to try to turn off, because part of the screen, I can't see you, just the top of your head. So yeah, that's better. I didn't need to research the history of the house, because the house was actually 6 or 8 months younger than my brother and I.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, my grandfather, my mother's father, gifted that parcel of land to my parents, and also gave them some money to construct the house. It was a bungalow at first. It was a modest, like 4 rooms and a bathroom, and then they expanded it, put 2 additions on, became a long, bigger house. Well, we knew the house's history. Nothing that we could find was revealing about why there would be ghostly activity. I think it was because of who was living there, because my brother and sister and I were there.
Right.
I think because of some trauma my father had in his life. I think, although he was not a believer in ghosts, I think he was the conduit, the agent for it that can generate poltergeist activity.
I always refer to people like that as they're the Kenwood amplifier.
Yeah.
They're sort of like, the signal you may or may not receive, but they'll boost it.
Right. So the person who would be least likely to exceed the acceptance of a ghost in the house was actually the one who was powering it.
Right.
I've come to think.
That's ironic.
Yeah, and then you had these kids interested in ghosts and talking on spirit boards. And I think that was the formula. I'd like to get back there, and I'm planning to, of course, they don't own the house. They're passed away. It's owned by other people. And I would like to stop by and ask them, you got any strange things going? But
what's going on in your cellar?
And I say, you're the weirdo from television. Well,
But you're the weirdo from TV.
Don't you tell where this house is? It's already known to be in North Situate from that television show. So I think that created the haunting. I fueled it. I don't know of anything strange that happened there before us.
North Situate's a very historical area.
Yes,
in general, as is most of Rhode Island.
It's like, Rhode Island. In fact, Providence City has its own zeitgeist. It's got an eerie feel to it, people say, especially the East Side region. Um, but it could also be the content of the ground,
Sure.
some seepage. It could be, stirring up the mineral content, uh, electrifying it, the moisture. So it could be charging the soil. And of course, much of Rhode Island was the stage for King Philip's War.
Certainly, very bloody battle.
1671 to 1674, and hostilities were brewing years before that. So there are all these factors, confluence of factors that could suggest it, if not explain it. But I think it was more the occupants we were. It might be combined with the territory, our land there. I was very attached to North Situate. That's why I grew up in a country setting. It's more built up now.
Oh yeah, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
So you go from your exploration with the Ouija board and everything. Now in college, once you get into, that's when you met the Warrens. Was it
Yes.
during your time at URI?
Well, it was. I was not enrolled at the college. I took courses there at Rhode Island College.
Oh, Rhode Island. I beg your pardon, Rhode Island.
But what introduced me to that college was a lecture. I think it was April 17th. Steel trap memory, Keith, my brother will, be able to give the date and the time and the moon phase, but he's remarkable.
He is.
But I heard of this lecture. I had heard tell of the Warrens in some article. Ed and Lorraine Warren from Monroe, Connecticut. And back then they weren't billed as demonologists. They were called the ghost hunting couple.
Right.
This is again, April 1972. So I was more than happy to drive to Providence and attend this lecture. My brother was there. We went in separate cars, and he was surprised to see me there. Here I am. So this was quite a night. You must understand, back then I was good looking and I dressed well. And it was the 70s. So I was out, this will be a good night. And I wonder if I'll meet somebody interesting, but I'm going to see the Warrens. Now, the Warrens were such a charismatic presentation. You had to like them, disagree with their methodologies, and which I do, but what a pleasure it was to listen to them, to go to a lecture by them. They weren't world famous then, although Ed was billed as the only demonologist who was recognized by the Vatican. Yeah, kind of. But attend this lecture, and as they're talking, I'm thinking, that's what I want to be when I grow up. I want to be these people. I want to be Mr. Warren, or do what he's doing. Make a living from that. So Ed had a question and answer session, audience participation. So how many people out there have talked to spirits? So I'm like, well, first of all, how many people have seen a ghost? So I'm like, no. How many people, raise my hand, and has anybody out there talked to a spirit? So raise my hand again. Yeah. Has anyone ever done magic, ritual magic? So to my surprise, Mr. Warren said, come up here, young man. So bump, 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 bump. A face on Keith when he saw me walking up to that stage. I became part of the lecture. Well, I was into ritual magic, and I was actually a practicing Satanist at the time. We'll call it, as I termed it, Luciferian. More positive aspect, but if you're known to that, you're going to get a bum rap, and there's no getting away from it. I was never into what would be considered negativity, like sacrificing animals, and I consumed animals. I just didn't sacrifice them. And
they're very delicious.
Yeah, some of them I can recommend. Some of them are
quite delightful. Now the vegans are going to write in and give me hell for that.
You ate lamb? Oh. But yes, but I never sacrificed them. In fact, it would ruin my month if I, ran over a possum or something. But
oh, sure.
Yeah, I mean, I just couldn't get over it. I said that it would probably be going back to its young or doing its possum things if I hadn't hit it. A squirrel. I would rescue stray animals and injured animals. So I was never into that macabre expression. I wasn't throwing curses at people left and right. It's just my form of emancipation and rebellion. Unfortunately, I talked to reporters about it when they asked me questions. But so I got to know Ed and Lorraine Warren quite well. That was a good kickoff to our relationship.
I met them once. I met
Yeah.
them once a million years ago, back when cable
Uh,
access was a thing. And they had that studio out in Portsmouth, Rhode Island. And
uh-huh.
a friend of mine had a panel show, and I was with the cemetery uh, folks, and they were on they were in a different segment, but I just met them in passing.
Yes.
And I think the one thing that it is difficult to gauge unless you actually have met them is how innocuous they are outside of what they do. Like if you were to see them walking down the street, you would never
I
even,
know what you mean.
yeah,
We
they
think
look like everybody's grandparents.
people tend to think of the movies. You see Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga, respectively, playing Ed and Lorraine Warren, and the Conjuring movies.
The actors, their portrayal far more intense than they actually were when you met them.
Yeah, well, they have to project that. Although they do
Yes.
pull it off, they give a good impression of the
It
Warrens.
was very well done.
And they were just like you had. I think you almost had to like them. Not everybody.
They
did.
were very likable, very
Yes, they
warm,
were.
very
They
likable
looked
people.
like you say, innocuous, average people. They would seem to be. They had dinner over at my parents. They were over at my parents' house a couple of times, our house, and they had dinner at my parents' house, and it was just like old friends. My father always had a sense of humor, which I inherited. I remember Ed. Oh, I love this cream corn. Love it. You know, he'd say, "What's that?" My father's name Leonard. He said, "What's that you say, Len?" And Lorraine was talking with my mom. They were the same age. Oh, Beverly, your hutch cabinet is adorable. Now, this your mother's? Said, yep, it is. My mother had good taste. And that is from the, Waukegan, Illinois. That's from the 1893 World's Fair. Oh, Beverly, this is priceless. And they were just like old friends, And that's my best memory of the Warrens. I wish I didn't have kind of a falling out with them, which seemed almost inevitable. But I thought we were going to go on the lecture, sir. I did lecture with the Warrens several times and investigated with them. But, that wasn't to go on for too long.
Well, let's talk about the elephant in the room.
Yeah, we're leading to
leading to The Conjuring.
The
We have
Conjuring,
to just at
yes.
least anecdotally mention this, only because folks are going to piece it together. The Warrens, Rhode Island.
Yes. Now that we've been talking about my good memories of Ed and Lorraine. Well, as I have mixed feelings about that. I don't have much feeling at all because it was about that case because it was so long ago. But the fact is, PIRO, Parapsychological Investigatory and Research Organization, the night the Warrens lectured, they saw me up on stage and several of their members came and they were so eager to talk to me, and they wanted me, because I seemed knowledgeable, and they wanted me about paranormal things. They wanted to invite me to their next meeting, even though I was still a senior in high school. They are a junior at that time, actually. So I started attending PIRO meetings. I quickly became a member of PIRO, therefore so did my twin brother, Keith. So for a year in 1972 to 1973 in PIRO, we were investigating external settings, the exterior things, and a ruined church where organ music was playing, and places where UFOs were seen, fields. So we wanted to get into residential investigation. To that effect, my twin brother Keith placed an ad in a local periodical, the North County Observer, advertising PIRO, that we do not charge for our services. We will investigate and evaluate your home. It was actually quite well worded. 3 weeks to the day after my brother put that ad in the paper and it was published, we were contacted at Rhode Island College by a Mrs. Carolyn Perrin. Carolyn Perrin wanted us to come to her farmhouse and evaluate their situation, give us our opinion, and see what we could do, because some of the things were disturbing. We were very happy to accept her invitation. She came to Rhode Island College, and we interviewed her. So that's how we first met her. She came to the college seeking our participation. And the next weekend, we drove to her house. For a long time, I couldn't have found that without GPS.
Yeah.
Now
There was no GPS then, Carl.
No.
Was that a test?
There
was no GPS.
Seat, no.
In 72, GPS was you tried to get it to fold back the right way.
Well,
It's impossible
I like
to get a
that.
map to
Your
fold
joke
back.
is
The kids
better
today
than
don't know
mine.
that. You can't fold a map back up. Ugly things
No,
happen.
and
The whole
it's
thing just gets in a crumpled mess.
that's preternatural. I mean, I just had to create the new fold, and then the new fold wouldn't take for the next time. No,
So,
I'm sure we had some laughs trying to find that place.
oh,
And
I bet. Well, this
then
is
we pulled up there.
rural area. I mean, Rhode Island being the smallest state,
Yeah.
and not, being relatively, even then, somewhat densely settled, there were pockets of areas, and that area of Rhode Island is, was more
Yeah.
rural than any other of the areas.
Right. Well, as my paranormal partner would cite, so that is the outside of the edge of the 7 mile safety margin outside of Providence in Providence County. And, back to colonial times when in Roger Williams, when you exceed the 7 mile line, then, the savages are out there. The wild animals are out there. You're not protected. No constabulary,
We
to
always said there
protect
were the
you out
wood choppers out there.
there.
Then again,
Yeah.
I grew up in the East Bay. I'm from Bristol, so
Okay. Yep.
we just
Mm.
do a lot of fishing.
Yeah, so was our case manager, but she was a little before your time. Our case manager, Pyro, Donna Eisenstadt then. And
But
yeah.
so obviously you had some very early experiences in the house, and a lot of folks know this
Yeah.
story, at least in the loose Hollywood sense that was presented in the film, and from some of the articles that followed that talked about, and of course the Perrons themselves have been in several newspaper articles and shows, and
Yes.
directly relating. When you were there, did you have anything frightening happen to you in the Conjuring house, in the Perrin house?
Yes. Yep.
What happened?
Well, I never thought it was of a caliber that should drive people out of the house, but I wasn't living there and experiencing it daily.
You're also a 14-year-old who wasn't scared by a ghost knocking. So I'm thinking your threshold is a little high.
I tread where, fools tread when wise men never go. So I was the first one down to the basement. I was the first one upstairs. I will say our case manager was nervous about walking around the house. She would not go down to the basement. Well, we were conducting the initial interview. I got to tell you anecdotal. I'll tell you a story about. So we pulled up in the then gravel driveway. It is gravel again, and I was a little sinister looking.
You?
Well, yeah. My brother and I both had shoulder length blonde hair, but
because
I was
that's
dressed
so
in a
sinister.
I was in a tight red shirt.
You're describing Hanson. How is that sinister?
Yeah. That's if we had one more, if we were triplets, we'd be that quasi male group,
boy
girl
band.
group, whatever they were. Yeah. Well, we kind of had that look. Yeah. And you got to understand, David and Sean Cassidy were celebrities then, and
I recall.
Teen Beat. Yeah. So
Tiger Beat.
There was Teen Beat and there was Tiger Beat. I still have a few of those in a suitcase someplace. So we get out, and I was the first one inside the house. In a book that chronicles this time, it stated that we pulled up in a van, which we never had a van. Rhode Island College wouldn't front that. That we were unannounced. No, Mrs. Perrin was interviewed by us the week before at Rhode Island College. I was not allowed in the house. No, I was the first one in there, and I became Mrs. Perrin's confidant. She would call me up and tell me what was happening in our house, the strange goings on. So, it wasn't quite as it's represented in that particular book, but I was darker. Yeah, I was, a red tight shirt, and I don't know, I had a little different demeanor. I always had this voice. And my brother was dressed in a white muslin shirt. He had his fluffy blonde hair, actually longer than mine. He was carrying a Bible. And as the author of this book put, the girls liked him so much. So let's face it, he was drop dead gorgeous.
Wait a minute, you're identical twins. I see what you're doing.
Well, that's why I don't mind saying it.
Uh-huh.
No, I didn't get a good review on that. I didn't get a good review. And,
so wait, you're identical twins, but only one of you is drop dead gorgeous. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. He said he was the image of Christ. He was Christ-like. His brother, on the other hand, was a different story. He exuded, she said, he was evil incarnate. It was not an objective telling, and very inaccurate.
I'll say.
But, and not just how we got there and how we met the parents. So, but the truth is, when they saw Judy, I think it was one of the, oh no, Nancy. Nancy went to the window and told her mother, they saw my brother get out of the car. And she said, and he's got his Bible, he looks like he's radiant. And, Nancy said, Mom, Jesus is here. Well,
Look busy.
I guess he was saintly. And yeah, and I was a little, I don't know, I just always had the deep voice. Plus I was, advising where we should go, where we should record and take pictures. So I think Mrs. Perrin assumed that I was the leader of this group. And it was actually
evil incarnate, apparently.
Yeah, the evil incarnate director of this group. Yeah. So we're sitting down.
Did you have that on the business card?
What's that? Yeah.
Director, evil incarnate. Yeah. If it's a deep voice that makes you even evil incarnate, I'm in big trouble.
It's almost like the Equalizer, Robert McCall. And so we're talking with the parents and asking them the pertinent questions, and Donna's asking her questions. And while we're sitting on the couch talking, Roger had to go out at a certain point, but he was there for the first part, the husband. And I heard shuffling around upstairs, movement. And I said, excuse me, Mrs. Perrin, do you have company? I'm hearing things, people upstairs. And she and the girls said, oh no, we hear that almost every day, people moving around there. So I waited for the interview to recommence, and I snuck out, made my way upstairs. They must have thought I was looking for the bathroom or something. So I had to hear what that noise was. Now, when I got to the top of the stairs, that noise ceased. I'm looking at the girls' bedrooms, and there's kind of a corridor joining them, short corridor. And I was looking at one of the rooms, and to my right, in my peripheral vision, I saw this blackness, darkness, absence of light coming for me. I thought it was just like trick of my eye, trick of my vision. And so I looked, reflexively, I turned to look at it, and this blackness is coming down at me, rolling down the hallway. My thought was either there's a solar eclipse that I didn't hear about, or there's a fire in the house. I was waiting to smell smoke. I thought it was a backdraft. That's how definite it was. And I'm looking at it. So it kind of enveloped me, and then it was gone, no smoke or anything. It was just gone. We're talking about something the span of maybe 2 to 3 seconds. But I went back down the stairs and gave my brother the twin look, like, something's up there. At our communication. Yeah. And I went down to the basement, didn't see anything, mysterious down there, except it was a creepy place. You really felt like you were being watched there.
I think that's what most people, I know a lot of people, not everybody may sense presences, but I think that even folks who may not commonly feel haunted per se can get the willies somewhere. And usually that's the first thing they'll tell you. And you'll say, well, what makes you think this is, well, I feel like someone's watching me. I hear that a lot. Do you? Yeah.
And you don't feel it in every room. You don't feel it all the time, but some places it really centers in where you do experience that. It's our senses. I mean, animals sense these presences. We kind of train ourselves to ignore it. But it was palpable there in that house. The house was built in 1736, so it had time to accrue a lot of memories.
Oh yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of log time.
Yeah. So I did. After a few minutes, I told them what I saw upstairs. So my brother and I we all went upstairs. There was one window that would not shut. Roger Perrin tried to shut it. He said it won't. I tried it. I leaned my weight on it, couldn't shut that window. And it was, although this was August 1973. It was icy, chilly in that room, almost as if they had an air conditioner on, but they did not. Couldn't close that window. Why shouldn't it be sweltering in there upstairs? My brother tried an experiment because the girls said they were poked and pinched and scratched in that room. My brother recited a psalm, the 23rd Psalm, biblical psalm, and he said the name of Jesus. When he said Jesus, that window slammed shut. If it was a coincidence, it was a darn good one, good timing, because boom, slam shut. And then what you can't explain by coincidence, suddenly Judy, I think, had welts on her face.
Oh.
One of the daughters had welts on her face, not, pronounced, but she actually had some swelling there. It looked like finger marks. So we were flushed with success. I went down to the basement by myself without a flashlight.
That seems to be your thing.
Stupid. Yeah, I was stupid even back then. And we probably didn't have a flashlight or something. And I went down there, and there was one light bulb illuminating the cellar, and that went off. It flickered and then went off. So if you can picture an 18-year-old Carl in the darkness saying, "Oh shit," but I could see the shaft of light going to the stairwell, made my way up. So all in all, it was a very interesting case, and we were enjoying ourselves, reassuring the parents that we'll be back. We came back there 3 times to investigate, and at the behest of Carolyn Perrin. Carolyn Perrin made her contact with me, and she would call me and update me on things that were happening in the house. Like she was slicing an orange. It was not a blood orange, but something that some viscous syrup poured that looked like blood spilled out onto her feet from that orange. And that's just always something. I could hear noises in the background, thump, banging, and she's living with it. Mrs. Perrin was I could say suggestible. She wasn't hallucinating these things, though. She was sensitive and receptive. So she and I just established kind of a rapport. And sometimes we'd just chat. She would call and we'd talk. And my father would say, when he'd have his newspaper, he'd say, "Who is this woman who keeps calling you? Is that a girlfriend?" I said, "No, not exactly, Dad." And well, we came back because Carolyn was having a rough time with this haunting. I don't think it should have driven anybody. It didn't drive them out, but then again, I wasn't living it daily. Something was eating at her. Roger had been kind of detached and stoical with her husband.
Right.
We came back to Round Top Farm. What a change I think it had been about 2 weeks. What a change in Carolyn. She was always an attractive woman, and she was slender, but suddenly she'd aged. She just looked like she was not well. I was aghast at the change of her in a couple of weeks. And Roger, and he was nervous. He was a little shaky. He showed us the abrasions on his arm. He had scratches on his arm. And,
now, does this typical ghost activity, though? I mean,
it can be when it's a virulent haunt, when it seems to have a personality. Yeah. I mean, if there's such thing as a typical haunt, these were the symptoms of it. Right. But the fact that it was depleting them, seemed to be draining their energy, was unique to that house.
Now they eventually moved out, didn't they?
No, well, yeah, they did, but for financial reasons more. Andrea's book, to which I had alluded, Andrea Perrin, the eldest daughter, she was 16 at the time. She has a series of 3 books that are titled House of Darkness, House of Light, parts 1, 2, and 3. And she chronicles her experiences there. Some of it's inaccurate, some of it's enlightening. And she talks about taps coming there. So we were like so surprised. I think we all noticed that. What a change in Carolyn. And Roger's agitated now about what was happening. One of us conceived I think Keith and I thought that up, that we would contact Ed and Lorraine Warren, with whom we were acquainted. Now, we never felt we were in over our heads. We were conducting what we felt was a scientific investigation to the best of our means. We were taking readings and measurements, photographing. We only have a dearth of evidence from back then. It's been so long. But we thought, yeah, we didn't say, "Oh, we can't handle this anymore." We were more and more fascinated, and we were, being mature about it. And we conceived of the idea to benefit from the vast experience of Ed and Lorraine Warren, since we knew them. They were a resource. Called them to consult, and Ed Warren volunteered to come. He said, "We'll come there." I said, "Oh, wow, now we're in the big time. Going to have the Warrens come and perform a preliminary investigation with us." I remember being on the phone with Mr. Warren. I was saying, "Now, I understand we're going to be investigating this house together." "Oh, absolutely," he said. "You'd like to see our case files? Send them right over. Mail them. Don't even wait." So the Warrens came, and by this time it was September of 1973. I remember I was the one who greeted the Warrens, because I think I knew them the best at that time. I greeted Ed and Lorraine Warren at the door of the Perrin's house, and Mrs. Perrin conducted and of course we weren't calling them Mr. and Mrs. Perrin, and we were Roger and Carolyn, and she led them on a tour of the house and said what strange things were happening. Now, in later years, the Lorraine Warren denied that we were ever there. She said, we were the only investigators in that house at that time. We were the first to investigate, which is not accurate.
No,
There's
because you guys have
photographic.
already been gathering.
Yeah, we'd been there 3 times before, and we there's a photograph of myself and Donna, a case manager. At first, I thought it was my brother Keith, and I looked, no, that's not Keith, because Donna has her arm around this guy's waist, so it's that guy is me. And there's a picture of you. What you see in the photograph is a rather washed out close up of his Polaroid film camera. Carolyn Perrin in front, and then you very clearly see the elegant Lorraine Warren, and she has her hand over her chest, which she would do when she was interested in receiving.
Sure.
And then next to Mrs. Warren is Carl Johnson and Donna Eisenstadt. So, I mean, there are several pictures of us there from that day. So I don't know why I didn't smile. I must have been a grim guy. And so we're going through the house, and then, yeah, I just went on and smile.
Well,
I haven't taken myself so seriously.
Oh,
and,
no.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of grim, how do you go from that into demonology? Because now we've talked about ghosts up until this point, and the next.
Well, to segue into that, I'll just say that was the last time I would see the Perrins for 40 years.
Oh my goodness!
My brother saw him a few times, but the Warrens totally took over that case, usurped it. It went from being an investigation to an intercession.
Right.
And they just do, you have a demon in your house, and that's all she wrote. And they had quite a falling out, the Perrins and the Warrens. It didn't end happily. But that, we didn't see them for so many years later. Our case manager at the time, Donna, she's still rather embittered about that. To quote Donna, she'll say, I'm sorry they're gone, but I could never forgive Ed and Lorraine for stealing our case. For me, It was an interesting time, and it's so long ago.
I'm glad you told the story, because that's something that
concludes it. Really, there are many details, but that's basically it. It outlines it. And why did I get in, and how did I get into demonology? That seemed to find me as an interest in avocation, as it became. It seemed I was being called into the darker cases. Like, we need somebody that can handle this. Our team doesn't want to go there now. Carl, could you come in? I said, why do I get this reputation? Well, that was our first residential case in Harrisville, Rhode Island. My next case, I was no longer with Pyro. Now we're going to 1980, and it was a house in the west end of Providence, Rhode Island. And it was a full-fledged demonic possession case, which I didn't did not anticipate it to be like that.
Well, I think when most people picture demonic possession, unfortunately, the images that come to mind are from the horror movies and things like that, notably like, The Exorcist and that sort of caper.
Yeah, those movies, they actually define our concept of demon, which, is rooted in the Middle Ages.
Sure.
And Europe. But a major influence in this family was that the godmother was Santeria. And so, in that culture, that belief system, they have free interchange with spirits.
Yes.
And, totally accept that. So I was friends with the family. I'd lived in Puerto Rico for 4 months doing research on Santeria, and, running out of money quickly. But I was there for 4 months on the island in Bayamon. Interesting time of life. Came back the day before Halloween. And that was 1976. So I knew this family. And one of the children, the son, one of two sons, his name is Lucas. We'll call him Lucas because that was his name.
Fair enough.
And that's so long ago. So I was invited to stay overnight at that house because they said Lucas was undergoing these fits, these episodes where another personality would take over him. The subject was a boy of 14 years of age. So I thought, he's in an adjustment period, establishing his identity at age 14, going through whatever crisis and adolescence will go through. He has these influences around him. So I thought, and perhaps he has a form of epilepsy combined with dissociative personality disorders, we used to call it. I could rattle that off even when I was that age. And so I stayed overnight. I was a little apprehensive, but I still thought a psychological malady. That's what was going on.
It was still all in his head at that point in your mind.
Yeah, I thought so. Although I'd get that eerie being watched feeling, but only in certain spots, and it would travel around in the house. So I stayed overnight. I don't remember the exact date. I just know it was 1980 in the winter, or I think by that time it was late winter, approaching spring. So I stayed overnight, and I'm reclining on a sofa on the third floor of this house in the West End. And it's about 1 a.m. I'm starting to nod off. I was adjacent to the boy's room. Okay. I hear this ear-splitting scream. How do you describe something like that? If you could imagine somebody being flayed, strangled or something, like he was being killed. This horrible scream came out of this boy. I jumped up and fumbled for the wall switch, turned the overhead light on. And as I did, his bedroom door flung open by itself. He wasn't next to it, but his body with a swoosh came out of that room. This is the boy, the 14-year-old. His body started like break dancing, but a lot faster. And then he was picked up and thrown by an invisible force.
Oh my goodness.
What do you do? I stood there transfixed.
Would you say that was the most frightening thing you've ever seen? Is it close?
In the paranormal world, the most frightened I ever was when I was on a Bigfoot hunt and heard a creature. No, that's probably it. That's probably the most disconcerting, most frightening, most unsettling, unearthly spectacle I'd ever beheld or have ever. Yeah, all right, it is. And because what do? I'm watching his body do impossible things. He did the spider crawl up the wall.
I was going to say, this is almost exactly what one would picture if anyone has seen depictions in the movies.
Yes, you have. Like The Rite, The Exorcist.
Sure.
Yeah. And I'd seen The Exorcist, of course, so that made it all the more frightening. But this was real, and I'm trying to reconcile that. Yeah.
I have that Mercedes McCambridge voice.
Yeah, I notice you do. You don't have to drink raw eggs for anything.
I do not. I do
That's
not.
Horrifying.
And will not. And will not.
Well, you're singing a band. You don't want to mess your voice too much. But yeah, when Lancaster Marin enters Chris McNeil's house, Chris McNeil, I'm Father Marin. It's like, a Dolby sound. Oh, well, that's what I'm facing, but there's no place to run. I'm there.
Right. Yeah. You can't put it on pause.
No. So his family heard the screams. They came upstairs, and as some of his family was coming in, he did a backwards flip onto the sofa where I had been reclining. And he started jumping up and down, flapping his hands, but with an echo to it.
Oh, wow.
And then he turned and looked at me. It was like looking into the face of hatred. He just looked at me, feral. And his gums were rather recessive anyway, so that made his teeth look, even more fierce. So he looks at me. So why is he looking at me? What have I got to do with this? And he jumped at me. Now I caught him in mid-jump, and I held him down. So I could have restrained him without hurting him, but he shoved me. I was my normal 200 pounds. He shoved me right off.
Wow.
And so then he came to himself, and if I needed any further convincing that this was a real phenomenon, he was shaking and shivering and crying for his uncle, Tony. So they helped him out, brought him downstairs. Okay, and an expulsion was arranged. It's a minor form of exorcism, just not formal verbiage. Some rubrics, but it was their own style. And I participated. Actually, I ended up leading it, I think. You go ahead to the next weekend. Lucas is seated next to a makeshift altar with herbs
Sure.
around it and
I'm
protect the
familiar with
birds.
the Altaria.
Yeah, yes, precisely. And he's sitting there looking kind of nervous, this nervous smile. And we all chanted a prayer. We were seated in a semicircle. I think there was 7 of us in the room. And we were chanting a prayer, the Lord's Prayer, I think that we were. And then something in that room changed dramatically. The floor shook. It's like the house groaned.
Wow.
I would have thought it was, and I wondered, is that a truck going by? Is it an earthquake? It was that palpable. The floor shook, but no traffic out there in that street at that time. And then it became silent again. And I was in the middle of the semicircle. My chair with me in it moved all the way back across the floor, about 6 or 7 feet back. I barely had a chance to be startled. Also, I look, nobody's pulling me. I'm back against the wall.
Oh,
Why me? I don't know. And Lucas fell to the floor and went through gyrations. The spirit, the presence took over him. Religious statue fell over because they were Catholic. The religious statue.
It should be pointed out just real quick that Santeria and Catholicism are not mutually exclusive. Santeria is a syncretic religion.
In fact, they're inextricably intermeshed.
They're very much intermeshed, as is like voodoo and other.
Yeah, because those old traditions weren't stamped out when the slavery trade, brought them over here. They were just incorporated into Catholicism and became their own expression.
Sure.
So it was. So they prayed to saints and to intercede for them. But one of those saint statues went off the table, which shouldn't have. And there was a picture, a religious picture. And I looked at that, hoping that Lucas, the boy, would see it and it might calm him or even agitate him. But I looked at the picture again. Within a minute, it had inverted itself.
Oh, now, if they had,
it was in the frame. It was just set on the table.
Oh my goodness!
If there were a security camera going, if that was filmed, what would that look like? Did it just all of a sudden was upside down, or did it flip and I didn't hear it because I just looked and it was inverted, which shivered me timbers.
I bet.
But I'm acting very calm. What I wanted to do is I wanted to get out of there. I felt wrong. I felt unclean. What do these people think I can do for them? In my parents' house, 18 miles away, there's food in the refrigerator. I want to get in the car and drive back. But I knew if I left, I might not be able to go back into such a situation or never with confidence. And so another part of my reasoning took over. I said, no, I've got to inspire some confidence in these people. I'm not moving. I'm not leaving. I'm not going to show any fear, which was difficult when Lucas started advancing at me like Bela Lugosi's Dracula.
Oh, my.
I even got doused with a bowl of holy water. And
I grew up Portuguese. That was a regular occurrence.
Yeah, you know that. And it wasn't just like blessed water. It had, and it had herbs in it.
Sure.
I think the worst part of that night was
agua de Florida.
No, Burja. And
agua de Florida. It's like
agua de Florida, the floral water.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that was blessed. Prayer. At one point, I suddenly felt a change in my emotions, if not my demeanor. I suddenly felt like I was being taken over.
Oh my!
I said, "This I didn't sign up for." I felt this onrush of emotion that was alien to me. That left me shivering. I felt anger, like maniacal rage, and I also felt panic. I've heard of free-floating anxiety, but suddenly this was gripping me. And what I wanted to do, seemed to be influencing me, is jump out the window. We were on the first floor, but it was saying jump out the window. And I said, I'm trying not. Is this a suggestion or what is this? It's not me at all. So I just concentrated on my own identity, my own sense of self, and it left me in the back of the head, the Mons area. I felt a pull like fingers.
Weird.
As soon as that seemed to leave me, there's a girl at the other corner of the room. This girl, probably late teens or something, She fell to the floor and started pulling out her hair in handfuls, pulling out her hair.
Oh my.
It seemed to really go from transfer from me to her. Maybe my mind was stronger or my will stronger at that time. She was more susceptible. All right. So the boy Lucas does his advance. He was my height, tall for his age. He goes over and he's coming towards me. I did not know what to do, but I held up my hand, said, stop. And he stopped. And I walked to him. I put my hand behind his head and gave him a little hug. And it seemed better after that. This is going over like an hour. It
Oh
seemed
my
like
goodness.
a long
That must be
time.
both mentally and physically exhausting.
It was. I was seeing too many freaky things for my mind to process.
It's a
I had
lot.
I had to act the part of somebody who knew what he was doing. And, to my surprise, because if you know about these things, Rocky, that
I do.
usually they have a regression, like the thing comes back
Sure.
after a time, a week or so. He was cured.
Oh,
He
that's
was better
wonderful.
after that. And he's only 14 and he was better. He had one more instance where 2 weeks later is driving with his parents. And they went by a church, a cathedral in Providence, and he was in the back seat and he started to scream when they went by the church. But that was just a little ripple of what had been happening, and he didn't experience anything after that. And he was just okay.
Before we get too far off, I do want to mention, speaking of demons and demonology, that folks can go to demonology.org.
Yes.
And find out more about what you're doing. You have a live cast. You have the Duo Demonology where you kind of
Duo Demonology. It's the brainchild of James and Nito, but we run it together. Duo because of us. Spelt the old-fashioned demonology as it was in the time of
Middle English.
Well, yeah, it was late Middle Ages, or actually the Renaissance more.
I'm a fan of the Renaissance.
Yeah, and it was the King James era. And in the courtly parlance, you would say demonology was spelled Daemonologi.
Well, folks can find Duo
OGI.
Demonology as well as Panorama Paranormal on Facebook.
Yes, you can find Duo Demonology spelled that way, or the handle for the website is just the modern spelling of demonology.org. And Panorama Paranormal. Director of Panorama is Elise Gianmarco Carlson,
who I hope to have also come and sit and have a chat with.
She will be
hopefully in the near future. So as far as I got a couple of quick demon questions. Now, one of there used to be no shows, then there was one show. Now there's tons of shows.
It exploded.
It's gotten crazy. I noticed that, and for folks that have watched most of the paranormal shows, one of the common themes, shadow people. And
shadow people.
The first thing someone says is it's a demon. It's negative just because it's a shadow person. Do you think that universally all shadow people are negative?
No, I haven't talked with them extensively. I have met a shadow person.
I think you can have something or see something or have one in your presence, and it's not necessarily a threat.
It's mysterious.
It is mysterious.
Appears and disappears, so it's threatening to people.
Well, we fear everything we don't know. That's why there's a zillion shows now, because everybody's trying to figure out what we don't know.
They're disconcerting. Sometimes I don't know if they're a ghost that's just not fully formed. I think probably they're their own type of entity.
I think I just kind of get irked. I get irked. I mean, I'm sure you can't picture it, but I get irked because the first thing,
with your red hair.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, but the first thing you would say, well, there's this negative entity. How do you know it's negative? All it did was walk down the hall. Come on.
Maybe we're kind of negative to them. How about that?
Right. Yeah. That's always a change. I just think, do you think that people, because of maybe a limited bank of descriptors, go right to demon very quickly because anything they're frightened of surely must be?
Yeah, because it's potentially hazardous and it provides an answer, which is a lot easier than saying, I don't know. I call that the boogeyman we know. DUNNO. Frustrating, but just don't know. The shadow ghosts, they're one of the more mysterious ghostly manifestations.
They are. And like you said, I think you had a great point. You said it might even be something that's not fully formed. And whenever I
Right.
see clips, and I have to admit, I've seen some great clips. I mean, I've seen some that I didn't think were that great, but every once in a while you'll see a corker. There's some good ones. And
Yeah.
that really do seem very genuine, at least in the footage. And I look and I'm saying all the guy did was peek around the corner and then peek back, and now all of a sudden he's evil. And I think that's kind of like, a little unfair.
Yeah,
And
had that
well, no,
happen at the House of Round Top, in fact.
I'm
Yeah.
being amusing about it, but I do think that jumping to that conclusion right off the bat, because you're either, as you said, fear, intimidation, because everything can't be a demon. I'm sorry.
Right.
I mean, just like, when people talk about past lives, everybody's Cleopatra. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure I was like Amun Ra, the chamber pot emptier. I was not Cleopatra. Nobody's ever like
Somebody had to do it. Yeah.
right. But no, we're all like lords and ladies and stuff like that. So, I think that there is some misunderstanding and misnomers with demons
Mhm.
in the paranormal, because people kind of default to that when they're either frightened or they assume something is negative or
Well,
something
we
is
lack,
being.
yeah, we lack an expansive nomenclature anyway. What do you call these things? A good ghost, demon, shadow person. Um, for me, curiosity, fascination overrides apprehension. I just want to study these things.
There's your
Yeah,
quote.
that shadow person may just our eyes physically just and the light we receive and our brains interpret just don't have the propensity to see fully these things. So to us, they're dark.
It may be
They're
just a void. Like, I think it was
yeah,
very, very, very cool how when you were talking about the black,
yeah.
for lack of a term, black smog coming at you.
That's why
And
it takes me 10 minutes to explain an experience, because I'm looking for words to
it
really
had to have been
convey what I'm saying.
indescribable, sure. But when you're describing that I think you said was the absence of light,
Yeah, the absence of light, it was like a hole cut in the fabric of reality. But
which,
my eyes will interpret that as blackness. Who
we had a
knows what it would look like?
pre-conversation before the show where I kind of said, I wonder, and I can't explain this. I'm not going to try. And I'm just nowhere near. You'd have to be like past Einstein level, I think, to actually get the nuts and bolts of this. But I think that sometimes our time constructs and our spirituality and what the paranormal, what some of the experiences people are having, I think it may be in a lot of cases very closely related to that space-time continuum, and whether things
Yes.
are happening at the same time in different dimensions, or I don't know how I would explain it, but I think that there's the time is a factor. It's relative, and I don't think we understand it.
Yes. It's not of our world, but it temporarily moves into our world and
Indeed.
transcends the boundary. And it's in both worlds for a time. That's why we don't fully see it. But it's interesting that they have human forms. Now, is that like because they're in our dimension, our reality, that they take on a human form, that they replicate us for whatever reason, maybe not even intentionally? Like putting goldfish in a tank, they'll take on the characteristics of their environment, their watery environment. They get
Sure.
bigger if they have a big tank.
Right.
These things like kind of copy us. They seem to have an intelligence and a volition about them. They're very mysterious. You think ghosts are strange? These shadow persons, what the heck are they?
Yeah, they do. They're in most of the clips that you see. There is a sentience there.
Yes, and they move, they walk, but not in the same time frame. I've observed a shadow person. They move usually rapidly. And I heard one case where it was actually somebody saw the shadow person walking backwards. That freaks me. That does. I was fortunate to be able to observe a shadow person in a unique environment. This was at Slater Mill site. I was for some years employed at Slater Mill in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, for 14 years. That's recognized justifiably as the seat of the American Industrial Revolution.
Indeed.
The arrival of Samuel Slater in 1793. And that's where Slater Mill proper was, the building that was built in 1793. The stone Wilkinson Mill, close by across the waterway, it's Slater Mill campus, that was built in 1810, completed in 1811. And also on the grounds was the Sylvanus Brown House, built in 1758. Now, Wilkinson Mill, with the giant water wheel display, 18,000 pound water wheel, that had a shadow person. I felt it was a male form because, well, only men would be working in the machine shop and the downstairs water wheel pit. Not any rules against the women working there, they just wouldn't have. And that's where the shadow person was. I heard about people seeing a shadow person. They called him the gray man. It would make guests nervous. They were walking the grounds. They were seeing somebody moving, and somebody's walking in there. He's the grayish. So our staff, including me, we would go in, and nobody there. And this shadow person was known to throw a heavy spike. Well, like probably about a pound or so of metal. Throw that across the floor, propelled by the unseen force.
Wow.
I finally saw the shadow person in January of 2013, and he was moving rapidly. I was investigating there. Well, I was overseeing, but investigators of the unknown. I used to call them the unknown investigators, investigators of the unknown team from Fall River, Mass, or investigating there.
And they're no stranger to Mills.
Right, precisely, being in Fall River. So talked to Jeremiah Olette, their co-founder. We were just leaving. I said, Jerry, one of your people still up here? Because we were in relative darkness. And he said, no, everybody's outside except for us. And we looked and we saw between two of the antique machines on display. Saw a figure moving erratically, but an outline of a man, of a person. And then I'm getting my flashlight out, goes away, then comes back. So all together, we observed this shadow person for about 7-10 seconds. That's a long time to see a ghost. But he faded out and came back. And I saw him several times there. Shadow. He had the opacity to block out light. So he was kind of there and yet not. And I made friends with him.
Well, you had to share a space.
Well, I was respectful for him. I wasn't going to do this provocation like, you're scared to show yourself. No, this is his abode. He doesn't have to do diddly
trash talking on
he doesn't have to do diddly squat. All that dude would negate things. He wouldn't show up. But I started with the water wheel pit. I started distributing when we had a ghost hunt there. I started a ghost hunt program and ghost tours, evening tours. And I would got colored glass pebbles and give them all the guests. And I said, you can make a wish if you want. I don't know if he grants wishes, but we're paying the ferrymen over the river Styx.
Sure.
Take it, toss it in. Think a positive thought and toss in your glass stone. And we did it, boom, boom, boom. And that was paying him. That was a little token. And we started getting more results with the shadow person when I implemented that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I had a presence to him. He showed up in a newspaper article in a photograph. It's like, oh, wow. We didn't stage that.
Was it a Providence Journal?
No, it was the Sun Chronicle. And I thought it was a woman's shadow. And I looked at it more carefully, one of the guests, and I said, no, her shadow is there. This is a shadow of a tall person wearing a hat and a cloak, it looked like.
And that's the Sun Chronicle. Was that Pawtucket's paper?
Yeah, it was a Pawtucket paper, Sun Chronicle. You can look it up. I've got a copy of it laminated somewhere in my files. So, yeah. And there's the shadow person. He got photographed unintentionally.
Are you still doing stuff at Swan Point?
Yes. Actually, resuming doing stuff at Swan Point.
We're all resuming doing stuff everywhere now.
Yes. Actually, yeah. Things are coming back.
Slowly
we have a date picked for the next H.P. Lovecraft convocation. It's called the Service of Tribute. Now, we don't exalt Lovecraft as the greatest thing that ever walked the annals of paranormal fiction or preternatural fiction. We just recognize his ability to scare people with his stories.
I think he was brilliant. I think he was very much a seminal participant in the genre.
Exactly. His influence is still widely felt and seen in horror fiction. Now, what he wrote was horror fantasy.
Sure.
Supernatural stories.
Absolutely.
H.P. Lovecraft, who was I don't know if I told you this, he was my cousin.
Oh, wow. No, I did not.
H.P. Lovecraft was my second cousin on my mother's side. And I found that out when I was researching him. The advent of the 50th anniversary of Lovecraft's passing, March 15th, 1987. I was early in the year, I was making a delivery for work, and I was thinking of Lovecraft. I think I remember he died in 1937. And there's no hint of any salute to him or any tribute or any recognition. So I decided to put on one myself.
Fantastic.
So I wanted to write an art. I didn't know how to advertise it except to write an article about Lovecraft, and I was published in East Side Monthly. So I had to research Lovecraft, and my first reading about Lovecraft, second, I got a little blurb on him before, but then I dove into his biography by L. Sprague de Camp called Lovecraft, and it was during that reading I discovered I'm related to him.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine perform some genealogy and did a chart. I'm related through 3 family lines. He's my second cousin.
My goodness.
My grandfather and he lived in the same state, and they were the same age. That's all right. My grandfather was a few years older, but like 3 years older.
That's just fantastic.
Yeah, well, that's all right. He never called me.
Yeah,
and I didn't write those neat stories he wrote, but I played Lovecraft in a play that was written about him, and I portrayed H.P. Lovecraft, and I actually achieved quite a resemblance with makeup, but I think there's actually a touch of a family resemblance there.
You know what? I can see it in the eyes. I absolutely can. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, again, please look up at demonology.org. You can find out about duodemonology. Also on Facebook, duodemonology, spelled in the ancient way, and Panorama Paranormal.
Yes.
And
it's not that easy.
And I guess we should probably, it's coming up the 15th of March. The Ides of March.
Well, that's not our first service, and they were around that date, but the first service back in 1987 was on March 15th, the anniversary of his passing. It was the 50th then. We will be remembering, I won't say honoring, because he's kind of a controversial figure too, but very, very more popular.
I think he was brilliant. He was
absolutely brilliant in his writing.
If there was no H.P. Lovecraft, there would have been no Stephen King.
That's it, and all those wonderful. He influenced the genre as much as Poe, as much as Edgar Allan Poe, who was the inventor of the modern detective story. And he emulated Poe. He admired Poe. He practically worshipped Edgar Allan Poe. He wanted to be like Edgar Allan Poe, but he developed him. He established himself with his own style, and so it will be this year. 2022, it will be, the service will take place at Ladd Observatory, which was built in 1891 and frequented by H.P. Lovecraft when he was researching the stars and the planets, avid amateur astronomer. That will take place on Sunday, April 10th at Ladd Observatory, and that's on the corner of Hope and Dial Street.
Well, that's a beautiful area to go, especially if you're a fan of Lovecraft. You can walk around and really get a sense of.
Google search Ladd Observatory, you'll find it, and it's free and open, to public attendance.
Fantastic.
Probably doing the whole thing outside.
One of my favorite descriptions of Providence. There's been so many, and of course his stone says "I am Providence" on it.
Yes, that's a quote.
It's fantastic. One of the things in the more modern realm, the first line of the last song on the album Hotel California by the Eagles is a song called The Last Resort. And Don Henley wrote the lyrics. And the first line is, "She came from Providence, the one in Rhode Island, where the old world shadows hang heavy in the air."
I didn't know that. And thank you for bringing that to my attention.
Yeah. Go give the album a listen. Well, we're going to wrap things up. And again, go ahead and look up Duodemonology and Panorama Paranormal on Facebook, and go to demonology.org. Find out a little bit more. Stop by the Ladd Center. And for those of us who are not in the Rhode Island area that time, I think we need to hoist our gin and Miskatonic to toast H.P. Lovecraft. Carl,
I've got my hot cocoa.
Fair enough. It's been a unique pleasure and far too long, dear friend. And thank you so much. And for all you others.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been wonderful. Take care of yourselves and stay kooky out there.
I will. And I'll see you again before long.
Let's hope. Take care, folks.
Good night.
Thank you for listening to Macabre World. You can find us on the web at www.darkerartsstudio.com.